Good evening and welcome to the Miracle of Prosperity. My name is Reverend Jim Webb, and I serve as the senior minister of the Tacoma Metaphysical Chapel in Silver Spring, Maryland. I also am the author of the book, The Soul of Prosperity, and it's such an honor and such a pleasure to be with you tonight. So my question to you, as always, is, what type of prosperity do you desire? Do you desire relationship prosperity, where all of your relationships are harmonious, supportive, and uplifting? Do you desire professional prosperity, where you have a wonderful job with wonderful pay and you provide a wonderful service in a wonderful way? Do you desire physical prosperity, where your life works well and your life experience is easy, effortless, and fun? Do you desire spiritual prosperity, where you find the deep peace that passes all understanding, and where you continually feel yourself to be a part of something much bigger than your human ego and something much more loving and supportive than what you've known through your human experience? Or do you desire financial prosperity and logistical prosperity, where your finances are never a source of worry and you've got enough to share and enough to spare and you are at peace with your finances? There are all types of prosperity, and they all come from one place, and they all can be recognized and realized in one way. Prosperity is not something that we seek. Prosperity is not something that we strive for. Prosperity is something that we are. You are part of a great flow of light and love. You are an expression of that great flow of light and love. And as you realize and recognize yourself as an intimate part of that divine flow, you realize that prosperity is what you are. It is an aspect and an expression of the infinite flow of love and all the forms that love would take. For all those forms of prosperity that we mentioned are forms of love. So just take a moment to breathe that in. Just take a moment to breathe that in. So understanding that you are prosperity. Prosperity is what and who you are, because you are love, and all of those forms of prosperity are simply forms of love. So then the question might be, then why are we here? We are here to remove all the blockages to us being what we are, prosperity, so that the prosperity that is an intrinsic part of our being can simply be expressed and revealed. Imagine that we're covered like a mummy in worries and doubts and fears and shames and all kinds of energies unlike love. But when we roll that tape away, what is revealed is our essence, and our essence is prosperity. So each week, I offer ways to remove the barriers to prosperity so that our prosperity can be revealed. And one of the most interesting barriers to prosperity that became apparent to me was a barrier to prosperity that we may not even know about. That barrier to prosperity that we may be unaware of is energies and trauma from past lives that may affect this life unwittingly and unconsciously. And so I thought this would be an excellent barrier to prosperity for us to explore. So I've amassed some experts to help us with that. The first person that I want to introduce to help us with that is Dr. Regina Rapelyea. Dr. Regina worked with Thomas Newton, who wrote the landmark book Journey of Souls, and I love her philosophy. She has a book, Solely Me. And the book Solely Me, she says, life is an endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. In our soul's journey from dark to light, every individual has a mission and a spiritual contract to reach a higher sense of consciousness and illumination. So she says we're all on this journey, and this journey is a journey to light. And understanding the eternal nature of our souls, that we are more than a body, and that our souls come back to earth to work out that which needs to be worked out so that we can get to light. So our past lives and some of the trauma from our past lives can be worked out in order for us to have prosperity, more prosperity in this life. Reverend Dr. Regina Rapelyea, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad to have you. It's so good to see you again.
Yes, it is. It is.
And I must disclose that Dr. Regina has done past life regressions for many of the people in the congregation of the Tacoma Metaphysical Chapel. She's participated in some of our events over the years, and so we know her like family. But this is the first time I've had a chance to interview you, so I'm very excited.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Yes. So tell me, this part of you I've never known, so this is what I'd like to know, and I think our viewers would like to know it too. What moved you on this path of exploring past lives?
Well, I'll make this a short story, but when I was very young as a child, I grew up in my grandmother's house, and
Yes.
around the age of 4, I used
Mm-hmm.
to see all of my relatives that had passed on that had lived in that house. And
Hmm.
to me, seeing this, it was the most natural thing. And I
Mm.
thought this was how everybody saw life.
Mm.
And by the time I was 8, I started having out of body experiences.
Mm-hmm.
As a teenager, when I was 15, I started having premonitions.
Mm.
And by the time I got in my 20s, it's just like for 20 years I had been engulfed in the mysticism of spirituality, and I just assumed that everybody lived this way, only to find out that, why is this happening to me? And I kept asking myself that question, and then I realized that it wasn't something that was happening to me, it was something that was happening for me.
Yes.
And even though when I was in my 20s, I tried to run away from this because I wanted to
Mm-hmm.
be like everybody else. And I had a working relationship with my spirit guides, but I realized that I'm not like everybody else. And that it took me until I was 29 years old to get on the journey, to get back on this path, because there was a part of me that just wanted to go out and do me and have fun, and my guides were very patient with me, but they also kept reminding me, you have work to do, young lady.
Mm-hmm.
So when I turned 29, I got back on this path, and I had been on this path for the last 41 years,
Mm-hmm.
learning about life. And I had a number of things that I was curious about.
Mm-hmm.
I've had a number of past lives as a Native American, and
Mm-hmm.
um, and I was at the time I was living in California, and I ended
Yes.
up moving back to the East Coast because I wanted to be closer to my family.
Yes.
And so when I moved back here, to show you how
Mhm.
spirit works, I met
Yes.
a man who was a regressionist.
Okay.
And I ended up having a session with him.
Uh-huh.
It just blew my mind
Mm.
because I kept thinking what came out of that session was all the things that I was trying to figure out about myself. And the
Wow.
other thing too was it's just I had to figure out who Regina was.
Yes. So you did a regression, and if I hear you correctly, I'm going to paraphrase this. All the disparate parts of Regina that you couldn't understand make sense of or put together made sense when you did that regression.
Yes.
So
Ab-
you do regressions. So you do regressions, right, Regina?
Yes, I do.
Some people may not understand what a regression is, so tell us a little about that process.
All right. Well, when you have a past life regression, there are two different types of regressions. There's the past life regression, and what you're doing is you're tapping into your subconscious memories because
Mhm.
every life you've ever lived, every person you've ever been
Uh-huh.
is buried in your subconscious memory. And
Hmm.
so when you do a past life regression, that is what I'm tapping into. And
Okay.
then there's another type of regression. It's called the lives between lives. And that's
Yes.
where I look at your life in your current life, backing you up in time until you're in your mother's womb, because I
Yes.
want to know what you're bringing into the lifetime from a behavioral standpoint.
Yes.
Then, yes, then I go into your most immediate past life. That
Mhm.
tells me more about what you're bringing in. And from
Yes.
that point, I go into the spiritual realm and dealing with you as a spirit.
Yes. That is wonderful. And that can help us all work through some of the kinks that we experience in this life. And your facilitating that, I'm sure, has been so useful for so many, because I've heard some of the stories.
Okay. I have, Jim, when I started it, I wasn't sure if I was doing the right thing. I
Uh-huh.
felt like I was doing the right thing, but I said I'm going to keep going. And I think the most important thing I had to learn was who I was so that I could learn how to help others. And
Yes.
it was painful at first because I had to turn all the stones over in my life and really
Yes.
examine myself, from
Yes.
a spiritual perspective. And I
Yes.
had to stop looking at my physical self as being who I was and
Yes.
understanding that my spirit and my soul is my true identity. And
Yes.
once I came to terms with that, then I understood how I could help other people.
Yes, that reminds me of a lesson in A Course in Miracles. I am not a body, I am free, I am still as God created me. Because that lesson in A Course in Miracles, similar to what Jesus came to teach, that we are eternal beings with everlasting life, tells us that we are and can be so much more than we think. And the pieces of us, many of which come from past lives that make up our current what my yoga instructor calls our current costume,
Mhm.
is just a costume that we wear for a moment in
That
the eternity of our lives. And that lifts a whole burden off of us because we know we can be so much more. And so I want to take my hat off to you for helping people to identify and embrace their truest and fullest identity and how that can help them to move forward. And I'll give you an example of how this could help us all move forward. I remember when I was considering leaving a relationship, I had a spontaneous regression. I saw myself on a New England farm as a woman who was very religious. I saw the pendant or brooch that I was wearing. I saw my hair in sandy brown in a bun with the hair on top. I wish I could see myself with hair on top now. And I saw the pendant just swinging. And my husband used to beat me. And my husband used to drink. And my husband used to mistreat me. And I didn't have a means of taking care of myself. And I couldn't leave. And I kept saying to myself before this regression, this was revealed to me, I kept saying, I can leave now. I've got plenty of money. I can leave now. I've got my power. I can leave now. And I didn't know why I was saying that until it was revealed to me that this woman on this farm in New England, married to this alcoholic, abusive man, needed to be free and healed. And she was still living within me. And that's just a personal testimony of how past life regression can help us identify parts of ourselves, heal parts of ourselves, and move forward on our journey of prosperity. And so I
Yeah.
want to thank you for doing what you do. I want to thank you for doing what you do. And share with me an example of how one of your journeys with someone has helped them to live a more prosperous life.
Well, I had a client at one time that was a newlywed,
Uh-huh.
and she was anxious to start a family,
Mm-hmm.
and she had a fear of being or getting pregnant.
Mm.
And so her parents, who actually live here in Fredericksburg, where I live, had actually bought a session for her as a present. And this young lady lives in St. Louis, and she came here over the Christmas holidays. And I ended up having a session with her,
Mm-hmm.
and I found that she had lost children in 5 different lifetimes. She either lost the children or she died in childbirth.
Okay.
And so she had a psychological scar
Yeah.
around bringing children into life. And when I looked at her last life that she had lived,
Mm-hmm.
she lived in upstate New York during the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
And she ended up having a child in 1926,
Mm-hmm.
and she died in childbirth.
Mm.
That was really put the cake on the psychological scar coming
Yeah.
into this lifetime, because she
Yeah.
had been carrying this baggage from lifetime to lifetime.
Yes.
And so in her last life, she did have a child in 1926, and
Yes.
she did die. But the child she had in 1926 is still living today in this lifetime.
Mm.
And see, once we go back and confront our fears
Yes.
around, whether they're mental or physical, it
Yes.
gives us the opportunity to release it to God to
Yes.
heal.
Yes.
You
Yes.
see, and this is why I do what I do.
Beautiful. You give people an opportunity to release the anvils that keep their souls from soaring. Psychological anvils,
Yes.
spiritual anvils, past life anvils. And that's what we can do in order to remove the barriers to prosperity. So I want to thank you for that story. And I want to tell you what we're going to do in the next segment. In the next segment, we're going to talk about some specific things that we can do to remove the barriers to prosperity that may be buried in past lives. And I've got another surprise guest for us to help us with that discussion. So for now, you just stay tuned, stick with us on the New Thought Media Network. And we're coming back with solutions on the New Thought Media Network.
Thank you, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, for your continued support. Thank you, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown Atlanta, for your monthly contribution. Thank you, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, for your monthly contribution. And please help us welcome Om Center for Spiritual Living in La Mesa, California. Thank you for your monthly donation. Thank you, Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, for your most generous donation. And a special thanks to Hefferlin Foundation for your generous technology grant. And Suze Ajit, thank you for your very generous donation. And a super special thank you to Dr. Tracy Brown, RSCP. Thanks for being a super donor. And a big shout out to all our committed donors.
And we're back. It's so good to be back, and we're with our guest, Dr. Regina Rapelyea, and she mentioned how she has helped others to work through past life trauma in order to allow more prosperity in this life. Now, I read a book recently, and that book was so fascinating because it also had to do with working through past life trauma. And it illustrated a number of different lives that this person had. And it outlined many prayers, meditations, and healing techniques that she used in order to work through past life trauma. And the reason that this is so important, even if you don't recognize it as past life trauma, there's a likelihood that it could be. And these prayers, these meditations, and these processes in this book can help you. So this person is a person very dear to me and very near to me. And the book is called My Infinite Self. Can you see it? My Infinite Self by Reverend Lisa Ray Brooks, our surprise guest tonight. Reverend Lisa Ray, we're so glad to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so happy. My Infinite Self. Reverend Lisa Ray, after my enthusiasm levels off, is the author of My Infinite Self. And it's a series of her lives, as well as the tools and techniques that she used in order to work through some of her past life trauma and to allow more prosperity. So, Reverend Lisa Ray, hello.
Hello, Reverend Dr. Jim Webb. How are you? Thank you for
Wonderful.
having me.
So glad to have you. I loved your book. I loved your book. And let me tell you one of the many reasons I love your book. I love your book because not only does it go to the past lives, but it gives us tools for how we can undo the blockages to our prosperity that these past lives offer. So thank you for that service to the world. And tell me, what are a couple of your most profound experiences that you discovered that you outlined in the book?
Reverend Jim, first I want to thank both you and Dr. Rapelyea. Regina and you both brought me to this very pivotal place of healing in my life. Um, these experiences, unlike the two of you, I did not know about spirituality until I was into my 30s. Um, I grew up as a Baptist kid and with a birthmark on my body from head to toe and wondering why I had it. Going through all the difficulties through childhood, being the outcast and so forth. I just wanted to have a better life.
Yes.
And in your experience, in coming to meet you, in one of the sessions I had with you, I was directed to look into past lives. Now, when that was shared with me, I said, oh, this is just a bunch of hooey. This can't possibly be true. Yeah. So I actually went to a group session with Dr. Regina Rapelyea, and I had an experience there. And I said, oh, there's something to this. And I established a long session with her, a 5-hour session, where I had even more specific experiences, even to the point where I felt myself in a space where I could feel the air going across my face and smell the area that I was in. And the real pivotal thing came for me when I was in our A Course in Miracles morning session one day. And Reverend Jim, we've been doing this for a few years. We did the session, we listened to the recording, you did a meditation, and in your meditation, you said, reach out and touch that hurt place within you. Well, to my amazement, what happened to me was I reached out and I touched myself in another lifetime. Now, it was very clear to me that who I was touching, which was a woman. It was a woman in the Amazon, probably in the 1500s or something like that. She had been tortured, and I reached out and I touched her. And she saw me, I saw her, I knew it was me, and I knew immediately what to do. I knew she had been tortured. It was clear to me. And I said to her, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Because she didn't know anything about Jesus. She didn't know anything about that. And she forgave them. And as soon as she forgave them, I had this wave of peace and just comfort come across my entire being, my body, everything. And and also that experience opened me up to something else. It opened me up to this feeling of abandonment because she felt abandoned. And as she felt abandoned, I didn't know that existed within me. But I remembered an experience as a child when I was in nursery school, and the children, they called me names. They called me Alligator Girl, and they made fun of me. They stopped playing with me. And from that experience, I had gotten to the point in my studies, in my spiritual studies, where I understood a lot about hurt people hurting people. And what I realized was just that my pure existence, just because I was alive and I made those children afraid of me, they were afraid of me because of my birthmark, that I was hurting them because fear hurts. And that caused me so much anguish in that momentous moment. I cannot begin to share the anguish. And I likened it to the way that, and I'm going to say this, that Black men feel in an elevator when a woman clutches her purse because they're afraid
Yes.
that man may do something. However, I just have to say that in that particular experience, as I was on the call with about 50 people that we have every morning, Monday through Friday, and I burst out into tears because I had this experience and I asked for prayer. And Reverend Jim prayed for me, and everyone else sent me light. And it was, all I can say is we cannot underestimate the power of prayer. The power of prayer is the medium. The Course in Miracles teaches us that prayer is the
It's the
medium of
medium
miracles.
of miracles. Yes.
Yes. Yes. So that was one experience that brought me huge prosperity. It broke me open. And once that broke me open, other experiences began to come to me even without going through any kind of regressions.
Yes.
I would experience myself in other lifetimes. And in my book, I put past lives in quotes. And I do
Yes.
that because I realize that these lives are not happening in the past. They're not happening in the future. They're happening right now. And
Yes.
and once I realized that, I was able to impact those lives, and they impacted me in their healing. One example, one really quick example. In my very first session with Regina, I found myself laying in the grass, looking at a white picket fence, and I said, "What is this?" I didn't understand because I knew from what I had learned that we don't go from animals to people, and well, anything can happen. I've learned that anything can happen, but I didn't understand that. And years later, I had an experience when I was going to a class to do a shamanic class I was taking, and I found out that I got a pain in my neck. I got a pain in my neck, and I got the pain because I didn't want to be responsible for what I was going to be learning in this class. Because
Okay.
once I learn it, it's mine. It's
You
for
have
me
to
to
own it.
teach. Right.
Yes.
And I didn't want that responsibility. At least I thought I didn't.
Uh
And
huh.
I went to the class, and I realized that everything that I was experiencing was because of a feeling of abandonment. And I said, "Okay, God, where did this come from?" I'm driving. And I said, "Where did this come from?" And immediately I was shown this life of a baby in England. And the
Okay.
baby was the youngest of 15 children that they had. And the family went on holiday, or we would call it vacation. And
Right.
the baby was to be cared for by an older sibling, and they forgot the baby. And the baby starved. The
Oh
baby
my.
died. And what happened, and that baby was me. What happened was I realized today what came to me was that the baby felt that it was abandoned. And I
Yes.
said, I know that I wasn't abandoned, that I was just forgotten. And
Yes.
because as the baby felt abandoned by its family, it thought God had abandoned it. And I, Lisa, now said, no, I wasn't abandoned. I was just forgotten. And I took it a step further. I said, I need to heal this. So what I did was I used neuro-linguistic programming, NLP.
Yes. Yes.
And in this NLP practice that I did, I set up Space Invaders. I
Yes.
put the game Space Invaders in my
Yes.
mind, and I
And
saw
you
the word
played.
abandonment, yes, walking
Mm-hmm.
across the top
Yes.
of the screen. And as I
Mm-hmm.
shot the rockets of abandonment,
Mm-hmm.
the word came down and it turned
And
into
just
flower.
fizzled.
Yes,
Yes.
they
Mhm.
and they came up as flowers. And when these
Okay.
flowers came up, I had this pop, and I was healed,
Mm.
and I saw myself as this young man. It was a young man,
Mhm.
and he had grown to adulthood. He did not die, and he had his
Mhm.
own family. So in
Okay.
doing neurolinguistic programming on myself, I
Mhm.
changed his life or my life in that lifetime.
Yes, and you
So
speak to
it's very
something very powerful, Reverend Lisa Ray. You speak to something very powerful. And Seth talks about it in the Seth material, the contemporaneous nature of life. And this is very esoteric. So the way that Spirit often describes this for me is they say, your life or lives is like a guitar string. You pluck it in one place, that vibration goes up and down that whole guitar string, and the whole vibration changes. So we think of them as discrete lives, when in truth, they are one contemporaneous experience. And
Yes.
that is so important because that gives us an indication that we can heal all things. Now, the other thing that I found to be fascinating about what you just shared, Reverend Lisa Ray, is the idea that sometimes a life can come up spontaneously, and you can know when this is a past life and this is the past life that is coming up for healing, and this is why, and these are the tools and the techniques that we can use, because many of us on the path, we have a whole quiver full of tools and techniques that we can use. and
Yes.
sometimes
Mhm.
and sometimes it may take a little bit of digging or a regression. So one of the questions we had was, how do I know when it is time or when I should get regressed? And maybe you can help us with that, Dr. Regina.
Well, I don't know if you, and I'm sure you have heard of like the Dark Night of the Soul.
Yes.
We all go through this in different
Yes.
periods in our life where
Right.
we experience things, and the reason why we go through this is because it's like the universe gives us options to
Yes.
change. It's
Yes.
and when we ignore those changes and we
Hmm.
continue to do things that resonate within our lower selves, because
Hmm.
God always wants us to get to a higher level. You
Yes.
know, he doesn't want us to stay down here in the trenches. And so
Right.
we get many opportunities to get ourselves out of the trenches and
Right.
into a higher state of consciousness and
Right.
being.
Hmm.
But soul growth is very slow. And
Hmm.
so when we decide that we're going to get out of this dark night of the soul, this is when
Uh-huh.
you have to release all the hardship. Like I said, people often say, why is this happening to me? Why am I going through all of these things? Well, you're
Uh-huh.
going through all of these things because it's like it's happening for you. And
Yes,
we
I
don't think
loved
that
when you said that.
it
I loved when you said, it is not happening to me. I am not a victim of the world I see, which is one of the lessons in A Course in Miracles. It is happening for my growth. It is
yeah,
happening for my good. So
yeah,
if I hear you correctly, you're saying someone can be regressed when they are going through something that is so challenging that they need some support in understanding the basis of this experience. Is that what I'm hearing?
that is what I'm saying, because what people don't understand is that, we bring all of our excess baggage from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And at
Yes.
some point you've got to stop, and you have to take a look at where you are going and progressing in your life. One thing I see in a lot of people, when you talk about prosperity, is that people live in a sense of lack.
Yes.
And so, and one thing I always tell people is this: as long as you look at your physical self as who you are, you put limitations on yourself.
Yes.
And when you see yourself as a spirit being, that your soul is your true identity, you
Mhm.
remove those barriers. But this is
Yes.
very hard for people to do,
Yes.
when you live in your lower self.
Yes.
I even, my youngest daughter,
Hmm.
example, She will always say, well, Mom, I've been praying about this and praying about that and da 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 da. And I tell her, I said, you know, you only have to ask God once. He already knows what you need. There's perfect timing in the universe for everything. And I tell him, I says, you have no idea what God has to move to get you in that state of alignment.
Yes.
Stop throwing it out there 10 times a day. He already knows.
Yes.
And the other thing too, your thought patterns.
Yes.
You have to put the right thought patterns out to the universe. You can't say you want something one day and then you don't know what you want the next day. The universe doesn't know what to give you. It's like making your mind, you know?
Yes. You just shared something that was so important for our viewers, Dr. Regina, and that is when you see yourself as more than yourself, you see yourself in your power, in your light, in your eternity, in your God self versus your limited human self. And that's one of the things that regression or pre-life awareness can offer you, a broader, stronger, lighter view of yourself. And that's so important for our viewers. Now, we had another question that I want us to think about during the break. And we'll get other questions during the break as well. But many of us who have pursued a path of spirituality have had many past lives where we have been nuns or monks, nunks. And intrinsic in that idea was a vow of poverty, a vow of self-deprivation, a vow of, an erroneous belief that we had to live an ascetic life in order to please the God that we understood at that time. So as we go to break, I want us to consider that question. And if there are other questions, feel free to call them in, to write them in the chat during the course of the break. So right now we're going to another break. We're on the New Thought Media Network. We'll be right back and we'll answer that and all other questions on the New Thought Media Network.
New Thought Media Network is on the rise. We're looking to grow with you. Do you have technical media experience or perhaps a desire to learn? Are you willing to volunteer your precious time and attention? We share this message to benefit all. If you possess a computer with a camera and a microphone, we will share our knowledge with you. Behind the scenes or being the star, let us bless our one. Contact us at info@ntmedia.org.
back. We had an interesting question that came in before the break, and we've got a couple of other interesting questions as well. The question that came in before the break was, how do we dissolve a pattern of multiple lives as monks, nuns, and all with a vow of poverty?
Well, I can say this a lot of times that we can choose to have certain past lives as a way of accelerating our soul growth. And we can have past lives where it's not based on karma, or some of these lives can be based on karma that you're paying off a debt. But we also can come into lifetimes to go through different types of hardships to accelerate our soul growth.
And so, in other words, sometimes those lives where we chose an ascetic pattern of poverty were designed to help us focus on spirituality, to develop a stronger spiritual muscle. And now that they've done their part in helping us to come in as more fully realized spiritual beings, we don't need that self-denial anymore.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yes.
because you're fulfilling a contract. Our lives are about contracts, spiritual
Okay.
contracts that we
Yes.
have.
Okay. So that contract is complete, and we don't need the asceticism, the self-denial, or the self-withholding anymore, because what that was designed to help us with has been completed. Thank
Yeah.
you. What a wonderful answer. Thank you. Now, one of the other questions that came in was, has anyone ever been regressed? And we've talked about a couple of our spontaneous regressions. And so Reverend Lisa Ray and I will talk about some of our actual regressions where we did a past life regression. I did one years ago with Reverend Carl Pileski. When Reverend Carl Pileski and I were with our work boots on and our village people hard hats on, scraping the asbestos off the floor at 8120 Fenton Street, building 8120 Fenton Street so we could have a place to worship, and painting the walls ourselves and knocking down the walls because it was an office building ourselves, and trying not to swing the hammer at each other and kill each other in the process. It was quite interesting. It was like, okay, we might need to explore this a little more. And we had a past life regression, and it was fascinating. But what was equally as fascinating was we had a future life progression.
Mhm.
And in this future life, we were together, and we were in this, like, we were scientists. And I was like, I was a man and he was a woman. And it was very interesting because he was a woman and I couldn't figure out what race he was. And the reason I couldn't figure out what race he was that this was so far in the future that everybody was everybody's race and it didn't matter. And I'm like, what are you? And then I realized, oh, it doesn't matter then. and he was this woman, and I knew his name was Laura. Her name was Laura in that life, but it was spelled Lara, Laura. And we were working together. And I was doing my male peacock thing, trying to get her attention. And she wasn't having any part of me. And she certainly wasn't having the part of me I wanted her to have. And so she was just like ignoring me. And she said, oh, no, I'm not going there anymore. I've been there. I got that T-shirt. I'm not going there. So she was just ignoring me. And it was just so fascinating for that. And and Reverend Pileski had a future life progression where he said, he said he was having a baby. He was a woman in that life, and he was having a baby. And he said, I'm having Jim's baby. This is the happiest day of my life. So that was fascinating. Now, Reverend Lisa Ray, you went to Reverend Dr. Regina Rapelyea for some of your regressions. Tell us about one of your regressions that you've had.
Actually, the one I talked about being in England, that was one of the things in regressions with Reverend Dr. Regina. But I also had Regina spoke briefly about in between life regressions. And if I may, I just want to talk about my experience with that.
Yes.
And in that particular experience, I made a choice to step in to the in between life before another lifetime that I know about, that I learned from Reverend Regina,
Mm-hmm.
um, Reverend Dr. Regina. But as I chose to step into that lifetime and that in between space,
Yes.
which was heaven,
Yes.
which was home,
Yes.
which was pure peace,
Mm.
pure love
Mm-hmm.
in this space that is indescribable.
Yes.
But as I stepped into it, I learned something major for myself.
Okay.
And what I learned in that space was that I chose to have this birthmark to
Okay.
remember that I have been here to go through this process, to
Mm-hmm.
go through this past life regression process, to know that it's real, to understand that we are eternal beings and
Uh-huh.
that we can impact ourselves in multiple space, time, and dimensions. And that blew my mind that
Wow.
I chose this, chose to
Mm-hmm.
have it in this lifetime so that I could go through this process.
Hmm.
And I have to also say that going through the regression with Dr. Rapelyea, it helped me find the lifetime that also caused me to have the birthmark. And that was a
Okay.
lifetime where I was a general in a military academy. And the powers that be asked me if my cadets could fight in a war, and they fought. These were young children from the
Mm.
ages of 13 to 18, and they
Mm-hmm.
fought and they won, but at great cost. A lot of them
Yes.
were maimed, and many of them were killed, but they won. And in my arrogance in that lifetime, and this was in Prussia in 1847,
Uh-huh.
in that lifetime, you know, I just I I I chose to do that. And
Yes.
um, in another lifetime, the lifetime after that, and it's very difficult to say that it was after that because it was actually happening at the same time.
At the
But
same time. Yes.
yeah, yeah,
Parallel.
yes, it was parallel. But in
Yes.
that lifetime, I chose to be a African American servant in upstate New York, where I was paid well, lived in this beautiful mansion, but I had a very lonely lifetime. So I had to be very humble. So I chose to have that lifetime because my choice was to learn humility. So it's very interesting how we make the choices on our soul's progression uh,
Yes.
in order to fulfill our soul's purpose. So,
Thank you. Wonderful. Wonderful. So we had a question for Dr. Regina. Is the technique similar for doing past lives, life between lives, and future lives? Is the technique similar?
Yes. Yes, it
Okay.
is. Yeah. So
Okay.
you have age regression, past life regression, lives between lives, and progression. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The
You know
technique.
what has always been so fascinating to me, Dr. Regina? The lives between lives. I was always a big fan of, I can never get his first name right, but his last name was Newton. Thomas Newton?
Michael.
Michael Newton.
Michael.
Yes. And I loved his books, Journey of the Souls, and the other ones,
Destiny of Souls,
Destiny
Journey
of
of
Souls.
Souls.
Yes. They were wonderful because they focused on the lives between lives and our planning. And uh, that gave me a perspective. Now, he did a lot of case studies that were fascinating. I
Yeah.
understand he was one of your mentors.
Yes, he was my mentor.
Oh,
He was.
wow.
It was crazy how I met him, but
Uh-huh.
someone had called me real quickly and asked me to come to Virginia Beach to hear someone speak, and
Uh-huh.
so I ended up going down on a Friday morning. And by the
Hmm.
time I got to the hotel, um, I was waiting to check in, and there was this guy registering to check in also, and with in Bermuda shorts and a t-shirt and some dirty sneakers and a baseball cap. I had no idea that's who I was coming to see.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was kind of weird. And then that night they had a reception for him, and I met
Uh-huh.
him at the reception.
Oh,
And when I
cool.
met him, it was like I've been knowing him all my life.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. And
Yeah.
so, if I understand, you're doing some case studies very similar in your next book. Is that right? Did I hear
Yeah.
that right?
Yes. I'm writing a book. It's called My 11-Year-Old Self Behind the Veil.
Okay.
And I'm looking at a number of my case studies that I'm putting into this book.
Oh,
And
neat. So that'll be fascinating. We look forward to that. Reverend Lisa Ray, what are you working on these days?
I am working on my next book, which is leaning into more of the processes that I used to do the healing after I determined what it was. But
Yeah.
the one thing that is true throughout the entire process, that there's always love in it. No
Yes.
matter what is going on or what has happened
Mm.
for you in this lifetime versus another lifetime, or what you're experiencing, it all, if you boil it down to the lowest common denominator, it's love.
yes.
And that, yeah, that helps me continue through everything that I'm doing. So
Yes.
I'm putting together classes to help people uh, to recognize the love that they are, the love that they
Mhm.
have within. I'm doing them for
Yes.
men. I'm doing them for women, and
Yes.
it came to me to also do something for children, but I haven't
Yeah.
started on that yet. And
Yes.
you'll see more coming from me soon. So thank you.
Well, we look forward to it, and we look forward to the next things coming from the both of you. I want to thank you both for joining us today and enlightening our listeners, our guests, and supporting us all in knowing one thing: time is contemporaneous. When we heal, we may be healing things from what we call past lives that are happening contemporaneously, and we may be healing things from what we call future lives that may be happening contemporaneously. And any and everything that we heal makes our prosperity more effortless, because what we heal will then reveal. And listen to this, everybody. What we heal will then reveal the light and the prosperity that is our natural state. So, with that, I want to thank you both, and I want to thank you for being with us tonight on the miracle of prosperity. We also want to thank our producer, Michael, and we also want to thank the New Thought Media Network. This is
Yes.
the New Thought Media Network, the miracle of prosperity on the New Thought Media Network.